So let me introduce her. Her name is Laurie Hallmark, and she is the Special Project Director for Mental Health Programs for Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid. Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid's mental health programs provides representation and advocacy for people with serious mental illness to access the supports and services they need and want in order to live the lives they choose, integrated into the community. And in speaking with Ms. Hallmark, she told me she has the best job in the world. Her clients don't live in beige boxes. She prefers those who live in colorful spheres. So please join me in welcoming her this morning.
Is this okay? Is it maybe too loud? Good volume? Okay. All right, so luckily I know this topic very well, but I've kind of modified it a little bit for y'all. So we'll see how we do. Psychiatric advance directives. All right, what are they? Just like a medical advance directive, a psychiatric advance directive is a document that enables a person with a serious mental illness to say what works for them and what doesn't work for them, what they want and what they don't want regarding psychiatric treatment. At its essence, that's what it is. In the statute, so there's a very core component of the directive. It's called the Declaration for Mental Health Treatment, and that's part of the statute. So that's the very core of the Psychiatric Advance Directive. And it has 3 parts. Psychoactive medication. Psychoactive medication gives the person with a serious mental illness the ability to provide information to hospitals, crisis personnel, jails about the medications that work and the medications that don't work. Why is this important? Well, let's say I had lithium back in 2009. Have a client that this is the situation. She had lithium back in 2009. She ended up with lithium toxicity, which can happen with lithium if you end up dehydrated. So if you get really sick and you end up dehydrated, if you end up with lithium toxicity, your kidneys shut down and you can go into a coma, which is what happened with her. No one knew it. Later on, 10 years later, no one knew that she had lithium toxicity. So what did they have her on? They had her on lithium. We have clients who, they know what works for them, right? There are all different kinds of psychiatric medications. They work differently in different people. And so if you've spent years trying to figure out which meds work and which meds don't work, that's really helpful information. We might as well not start from the beginning. So that's something that can be provided to the hospitals, to the local mental health authorities, so that everyone is on the same page. Convulsive treatment is just part of the document that enables a person to say whether they consent or don't consent to convulsive treatment. If they don't consent, it's a 100%. You cannot override it. It's the only part of the document that 100% cannot be overridden. But it also enables the person to provide conditions. So for example, I want my mother, I trust my mom to make the decision. I need the doctors to consult with her. Preferences for emergency treatment. This one I really love. So the first part of it is we tell my clients whenever we ask them to choose, they're always very confused. And this is a good example, and y'all should probably be familiar with this, of people who write laws don't necessarily understand or have ever been down in the trenches and know how things really work. And so oftentimes you'll have people who mean really well, but maybe they've just created something that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So in preferences for emergency treatment, it's a way for a person with a serious mental illness to choose if there is an emergency inside a hospital, if there is a situation in which staff feel that they need to act right now. Which do I prefer? Forced medication, so that would be an injection right away, seclusion or restraint. You just put those in the order of least bad to most bad. And so my clients are kind of like, why are they asking me this? This is, it's anyway. What that part though gives us the ability to do is to provide hospital personnel with, before you get to this point, here are the things that please try first. Please ask me what's wrong. Listen, please offer for me to listen to music. Ask me if I'm hungry. See if I want to sit by myself or do crafts. There are very individualized techniques and things that our clients know that we can provide that information to hospital staff to avoid an escalation, which is best for everybody. Okay, so that's just the core. With our psychiatric advance directives, we are adding additional components. The first one that we add in addition to the core is information for law enforcement and crisis personnel. So we put in there things that may help de-escalate. So for example, I have a veteran client who he knows, he has a lot of insight about his psychosis. When he's well, he has a lot of insight about what happens to him when he goes into a flashback or PTSD trauma and he is having psychosis. He knows that one of the things that he sometimes thinks is that he'll think that people aren't who they say they are. So they're, shapeshifters or imposters. But he also knows that he has these tricks to tell himself when he's inside psychosis. Please tell me that you are who you say you are. Please give me your name. Please offer me a card. Please tell me I'm not in Afghanistan. Please tell me the day, the month, and the year. Please call me by my name. Please don't call me by my name. So things that could escalate and things that could de-escalate. Please don't move behind me. Please don't say my name. Please look me in the eye. Please tell me you're going to touch me before you do. Please give me a chance to go with you willingly. With each of our clients, I find that it's very individualized, so it's a really helpful addition to the great CIT training that is already available in many parts of the state. So that's something that we really want to make sure that we put into the document. We also go ahead and do a medical power of attorney. So that's identified in the document as well. Who is my medical power of attorney? Whether they're a veteran, this one's critical. If someone is a veteran, we want them to be able to go to the VA. And in this document, we can provide information to let law enforcement crisis personnel know I'm a veteran and here is my veteran information, so please take me to the VA. And next of kin, this is something that the hospitals recently asked me for, because so often they'll have people that come in with serious mental illness who are having a medical crisis as well, and they need to know who the next of kin are. So we're able to provide that information. Preferences regarding notification of others. When someone is taken into a hospital, their family doesn't necessarily know where they are. Oftentimes they're going to be in crisis. They're not going to be able to make a phone call or tell anybody. So this gives the ability to provide the hospital with a release for HIPAA specifically for the purpose of notifying an individual. So I waive HIPAA for the purpose of notifying X person to let them know that I'm in the hospital. Okay, so why? Why do we want to do these? I think that they're really critical for rural areas. They can be, well, they're critical everywhere, but they can be a really helpful tool for y'all. And you don't, because you're a rural area, these can work better for y'all than in urban areas in some ways. So that's kind of an unusual thing. All right, on the civil side, why do we want these? Well, first of all, it provides a literal on-the-page mechanism for coordination of care. Y'all know what happens anytime someone enters into the system, no matter where they go in, it's like they're falling off of a cliff when they come back out. They go into a jail, so one thing happens. They come back out, they fall off the cliff. Maybe they get back into the local mental health authority, same thing. Same thing with the hospital, they come back out. Every place that the person enters the system and leaves the system, it's as if they're an entirely new human being. So nobody knows what anyone else is doing, and this is a problem, right? We all know that. So it's how do we address that? Well, until we're able to get some sort of online system, and actually these would be fabulous for an online system anyway because they condense the information into a usable form, this is a literal document that can provide coordination of care. Treatment compliance. The reality is that unless we're going to lock people up, strap them down, and force medication on them for the rest of their lives, we have to have buy-in. That's just the radical pragmatism, that's just the truth. When you provide, what we find is when you provide people with choices and you let them tell you what works and what doesn't work, it's amazing how often we all know what works for us and what doesn't. And as soon as you start providing those choices, suddenly the person is involved in their care, and so it's not something that you're imposing upon them, it's something that they're choosing. I have only had one client that said he didn't want to take any medication. Only one, I have had one. Everyone else has said, this is what works for me, this is what doesn't. I want to let everyone in the system know that this is what works and this is what doesn't. And if they work with me on this, I'm more likely to comply. Obviously, the main goal is to avoid or reduce crises. The idea is that with these documents, and we're doing expanded documents that can provide information such as what are accommodations that would help me to maintain my housing, employment, education, that kind of thing. The idea is to try to address the underlying issues that are leading to the cycle of recidivism, right? So we're lucky because we have all of these civil legal teams. So we can identify this person has come out of jail or they've come out of prison, they've lost their public benefits. They don't have housing. They have a divorce that they would like to have. Now, I have a client like that. He's street homeless, and we did a psychiatric advance directive for him. And one of the things that was really cool, and we did it outside, like I was sitting outside with a computer. I felt very legal 80. But the idea that we were providing a legal document for him, that was his. It was his choices, it was his document, he owned it, I worked for him. That alone empowered him in a way that he reached out for other services. So now we have additional cases open. He is someone who's been in prison and he lost his public benefit, so now he's street homeless. But he's also wanting a divorce. It's really important to him. And that matters, and we have the ability to provide that. So it's really trying to address all of the underlying issues that are leading to the cycle. Because as y'all know, we can put a Band-Aid on it, right? We can fight an eviction one time. We can put someone on probation once, send them out, make a direct referral. But if you don't address those underlying issues, stay there long term and figure out what's going to work for the person so that they're able to develop the life that they want, nothing is going to change. So ultimately, what we're hoping is that the Psychiatric Advance Directive can become a mechanism for bottom-up services as opposed to top-down. I have a client in West Texas who she'll call me, so she qualifies for anger management services, and she'll call me sometimes before her caseworker is going to come out, and she'll say, Miss Laurie, I'm praying to Jesus that he will give me patience to not get mad at my case manager who's coming out to do anger management services. So clearly something is wrong. It's not working. I really wish y'all could see these pictures, so I'll have to describe them to you. It's a pretty little plant. It's a very small one, and it looks like it likes a moist environment. And I think of it as the spirit of a person with serious mental illness. So if you think about a little plant that needs water to grow, it needs many other things too, but it needs water. Our current system, I think, can be visualized as a choice between two things. Either the kind of water that mesquite likes, which yay mesquite, but our little plant needs more water than that, or the opposite direction of a big fire hose shooting water on this tiny little plant. We do one of those two things, and neither one of them works. So what this is all about, what psychiatric advance directives are about, is let's look at that little plant and let's find out from its perspective, what does it need? So it needs water, but in what form? Do we need to do a hose? Do we put one of those little ball things in the ground? Do we do a sprinkler? We've got to get it water, but how we get it water, that's the key, and that's what the directives are trying to address. On the criminal side, obviously the goal is to avoid the crisis in the first place. That's the goal. But let's say that it's happened, there's a crisis, the police have been called. We have a client who the police would be called on an emergency detention order, and then he would end up with multiple charges based on that interaction. So the idea is that we provide the police with the information about what can de-escalate, and so we first of all hopefully avoid those arrests. We hopefully avoid those additional charges. And if we do that, we've also changed the dynamic, so that person no longer now sees, oh my gosh, the police are coming. They can see the police as a mechanism of help instead of a mechanism that goes to jail. And so it's the perspective of the person that can change. Plus, now you don't have those additional charges and this person in your jail. So improve the situation within the jail. Again, if you provide information to the jail about what works with de-escalation, it's the same kind of thing as you've provided within the hospital, right? These are individualized techniques that the jail can use so that you don't have the escalation. Empower the magistrate. How? Okay, well, if I have this information about what works for this individual and what doesn't, and they have some buy-in, then it empowers me to be able to provide terms for release that the person can actually abide by and comply with. Competency. So I think of competency as this flood, right? We have all these people that are sitting in our county jails, and it's just super expensive. It's really bad for them too, but it's also really expensive, and it's totally counterproductive, right? I mean, they get sent off to a state forensic hospital, and then they come back. They're not cured. This isn't treatment. We're doing what we can. But instead of looking at the flood and picking up a bucket and trying to figure out, well, how do we get rid of all these people that are sitting in this flood in our county jails? What I say is, let's figure out how we can turn down the spigot and prevent people or reduce the number of people who are going into that process in the first place. And this is one of the things that our public defenders at Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid have been really good about, is that they've looked at this approach and recognized that I can work with this client in a different way and provide accommodations, and we can avoid going the competency route, and that is best for everybody. Okay, so this is the big challenge. This is where you're benefited by being in a rural area. If you know who the people are typically in your communities that have serious mental illness. So that's the benefit, is that you know who these people are. You can coordinate with each other, and so you can use the actual document. You can provide the document to law enforcement, to the court, to the lawyers, so that everybody is working from the same document. There is no online system right now. We're trying in, I don't want to even say it, Bexar County. But what would be really great is if we had a statewide advanced directive database that you could use for medical advanced directives and psychiatric advanced directives. I mean, that would be fabulous. But for rural counties, we're just kind of, doing what we can and saying, here is this document, you know your people, y'all can work together. And so, like I said, in rural areas, you have an advantage because you know your population and y'all know each other and you can work together. The other thing that I think is in the criminal side is that you can, just like empowering the magistrate, you empower the courts. So you can enable the court and community supervision to create terms of probation that can actually work. Because we know what happens, right? We set terms of probation, the person gets sick, they can't comply, now we're dealing with the revocation. The other thing that it can do, in addition to setting terms that the person can more likely be able to succeed with, is it can enable that communication between the criminal side and the civil side, right? You've got the same document. So if things start to go wrong, hopefully you can modify the terms before you get to the motion to revoke. So the entire idea is that you're proactive and not reactive. That's the idea. Let's figure out how to reduce the crises in the first place. Let's figure out how to reduce the person entering the competency route in the first place. To the extent that we can reduce the bad result of someone failing their probation, being revoked and sent away to prison, let's do that. The last thing is that a critical component, the only way this works is if the document has integrity from the perspective of the person who owns it. The person with the serious mental illness has to trust that this is their document, they own it. And therefore, the way that it's created is critical. We are hiring peers. It's been me and a peer. We've been kind of doing a variety of things. But it's very important that the person understands these are my choices. I'm not being forced to make these decisions, and I have the ability to say what I want and speak freely. In that way, the document has integrity. One quick example, and then I'll shut up. I have a client who was recently in a psychiatric hospital. He was in the VA, and I don't know if any of y'all have experience with the VA, but I love them. They're so great. The VA has a lot of bureaucracy, but if you can get to a human being, you can figure it out. So he was in the VA, and he was refusing medication. He was inside psychosis, and he had in his psychiatric advanced directive this one medicine that he knew the doctors wanted to give it to him, and when he's well, he knows that he wants to take it. So I took his document into him and we sat down with the directive, and he trusted it. Why? Because it was coming from him. It was his well self talking to himself inside psychosis and saying, this works for me. The document had integrity and he trusted it and he was willing to take it. This is my favorite topic, so I can talk about it endlessly. She asked if I had any extracurricular things of interest to give y'all a little information about me. The answer is no. So my email is in the computer thing. Yes.
Can you say,
call me or email me.
when does an advanced directive go into effect? Does somebody have to be adjudicated and coming up for?
Okay, this is a great question. So there is nothing preventing someone from using the directive if the person is still competent. okay? Or I mean, we're dealing with capacity, not competency, so I need to keep those separate. So if the person still has capacity, the directive is not, it doesn't have to be used, but it can be. There's nothing to prevent it from being used. However, the only way that they have to use it they have to use it in medication hearings in the hospital, but the only way that it has to go into effect is if a person is declared by a court to be incapacitated. But the way that you can maneuver around that is the medical power of attorney. As soon as the doctor decides that the person is not able to make decisions, the MPOA can go ahead and initiate the PAD. Does that make sense? That's our way around that. Yes?
I had a chance to review the document itself, and just looking at it, that's not something that I would expect to be able to go into a lawyer's office and fill out. So what's the best way, because there are questions in there that a lawyer wouldn't certainly be expected to answer. And so what's the best way to get that filled out and taken care of properly so you know that that's what you want?
So you're asking about being able to complete the document, about the mechanism for creating the Psychiatric Advance Directive? Yeah, y'all are getting exactly the critical components of this. The way that document is created is the most important thing. To the extent that you can hire peers, people with lived experience with serious mental illness to extract that information, you can then have someone else just draft it up. So it's the exact opposite of a social worker doing their typical assessments of checkboxes. That is not what it is. It is not, I'm asking you these questions, you're providing me answers. It is, we're having a conversation. So with my clients, I'll say, so if you are in a situation, and they'll fight the hypothetical, right? Well, no, I'm not going to be there. The police don't need to come. Let's say they do. They've come before, right? Yeah, okay, they have. What information can we give them that will let them know that how can they calm you down? How can they de-escalate? And when we have that conversation, then that information comes out that way and we can put it in the document. You have to have someone that's able and willing to have that conversation with them, and there has to be an equality there. There cannot be the perception of a power disparity. Otherwise, you're not going to get solid information. Does that make sense? It's totally bottom up. So instead of me asking you, what's your favorite color? What's your vision or whatever, I would ask, when you're going out in public, what do you prefer to wear? And then maybe we get to, you like to wear a blue shirt. So it's the opposite. So instead of me asking a series of questions and getting your answers, I am having a conversation with you, and from that, I am obtaining the relevant information because we're not checkboxes. Is that?
What I foresee as far as using that document, if I'm a lawyer, I'm practicing law, and you come to me and you want your estate planning documents, the advance directive, the will, and everything else, and I recommend to you this advance directive for psychiatric care, I can't fill it out. I don't know what questions to ask. So who do I bring in to help me take care of that document for you?
If I could flood the state with peers, I would. Because a peer is someone who can actually have a relationship with the person and understand where they're coming from. Or you can have someone trained. It's really not, peers are by far the best, and I definitely don't want to suggest that anyone is better than a peer. But to the extent that you could just have somebody that is trained and understands just to have this conversation, that you could just have an individual that's able to pull that information out and then someone else can draft it. We're doing it. I mean, it's working. I sit down with a client in Haven for Hope. I'm sorry, it's Bear County, but out, in the courtyard with my laptop. We can't do an extensive psychiatric advance directive, but we can get bare bones because we need information for law enforcement, so we can hopefully, stop that cycle for this person. I'm having a conversation with him. You send them to me. If they are in our service area, you send them to me if they have a serious mental illness. We have just expanded our project. Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid, my email's in so I'm serious. If you have a client with a serious mental illness that is in our service area, then email me. And if I don't answer, send another one with urgent that says, hey, you ignored my previous email, because I have a lot of emails and sometimes I don't do a good job.
Are you all available to train people out in the rural area in how to get this information and how to prepare this document? Because I know you cover a humongous area, and so if we all start calling you and saying, hey, I have this client that has these issues, But if you could come and train us how to do it, then we can do it.
I would love to do that. We already are doing training we have clinics, so we have law students that do some of this stuff. They're supervised, obviously. I'm not like letting law students loose on my clients. But yeah, that's one of the things with the project expansion. It's going to be less of me sitting down with a client and doing these documents, and we're hiring people. So I would love to be able to come and train. Yes, yes, yes is the answer to that question. Please let me know. I will go anywhere in our service area and train whenever. I would love to. Please. Okay, I'll be around for the, oh, yes, sir?
So are you saying you use, and I'm sorry I missed some of this, are you using a different form than what's already set out with the, I guess, Health and Human Services you can pull down?
So Health and Human Services, theirs is, we're using it basically the same format, but it's expanded and it has extra law stuff in it. So yes.
It just seems like in a lot of people, it's the more complicated lawyers make it, the less it happens. And that's just from my experience. Simple is better. And,
yeah.
You know, I know that if you're a lawyer and have a client, but you may not have lawyers or peers available that can do that. It's online. It's not practicing law if it's online. And I just was wondering why, how much more does yours have? And maybe you can, is it on the, can we go to it and download it on the link today? Is there a link?
Okay, you can see our template example on the link, but to answer your question, no one's doing them. And the reason, and it's not that they're not offering them. No one's doing them because if I'm a person with a serious mental illness and I have a negative relationship from my perspective with the local mental health authority or with the hospital and they're offering me, hey, yeah, you know, tell us what you want, this has no legitimacy for me. I'm going to completely ignore you. So that's the first problem, is that they're not able to do them because the people with a serious mental illness don't want them from them. Like, it just, if I've been involuntarily hospitalized, even if that was a legitimate thing and it needed to happen, I'm not going to trust that the people who involuntarily hospitalized me really want to help me complete a self-determination document. This is not the same thing. The second part, you're right. This is more complicated than just the super simple bullet points. The problem is that people with serious mental illness are more complicated than that, and that is kind of the underlying issue that we're addressing with this work, is that we're seeing people in bullet points. We're seeing them as check boxes, and guess what? It's not working. Therefore, cycle of recidivism. Therefore, my client, who the caseworker who means really well, is going out with worksheets and talking about deep breathing, and my client is calling me on the phone and saying, this is making me angry. How do I get through another session of this? We have to have this individualized information. This is what it takes for serious mental illness. It is a disability just like other disabilities, and when we start to see that this person has specific needs that we need to try to accommodate the manifestation of their mental illness, and that it's going to be different for everybody, there's really no quick fix. But I would suggest that perhaps it's easier than putting people in jails and having them sit there, or going, oh my gosh, nothing is working, we need to go to reinstitutionalization.
Maybe in Bear County with a lot of resources.
Yeah, no.
Happen everywhere else.
No, it's better. It's easier in rural areas. It's easier in rural areas because in Bear County, the complication there is with the online systems of how do we get the people who need to have these documents to have these documents. In rural areas, the different y'all know who they are. You can have them. It's a tool that you have right there. So I've gone way over. I'm really sorry.
That's because it's really great information. So she's going to hang around and answer any questions, further questions that y'all might have. And please, let's give her a round of applause for